name's Jim. I'm going to be reading Usher 2 from Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles. He looked up at the autumn sky. Somewhere above, beyond, far off was the sun. Somewhere it was the month of April on the planet Mars, a yellow month with a blue sky. Somewhere above, the rockets burned down to civilize the beautifully dead planet. The sound of their screaming passage was muffled by this dim, soundproofed world, this ancient autumn world. "Now that my job's done, Mr. Bigelow," said Mr. Bigelow uneasily, "I feel free to ask what you're going to do with all this. With Usher? Haven't you guessed? No. Does the name Usher mean nothing to you? Nothing. Well, what about this name, Edgar Allan Poe?" Mr. Bigelow shook his head. "Of course," Sandal nodded delicately, a combination of dismay and contempt. "How could I expect you to know about blessed Mr. Poe? He died a long while ago, before Lincoln. All of his books were burned in the Great Fire. That's 30 years ago, 1975. "Ah," said Mr. Bigelow wisely, "one of those." "Yes, one of those, Bigelow. He and Lovecraft and Hawthorne and Ambrose Bierce and all the tales of horror and fantasy and horror, and for that matter, tales of the future, were burned. Heartlessly. They passed a law. Oh, it started very small. In 1950 and 60, it was a grain of sand. They began by controlling books of cartoons, and then detective books, and of course films, one way or another. One group or another, politicians, bias, media presence, union pressures. There was always a minority afraid of something, and a great majority afraid of the dark places of the future. Afraid of the past, afraid of the present, afraid of themselves, and shadows of themselves. I see. Afraid of the word politics, which eventually became a synonym for communism among the more reactionary elements, so I hear. And it was worth your life to use the word. And with a screw tightening here, a bolt fastened there, a push, a pull, a yank, art and literature were soon like the great twine of taffy strung about, being twisted in braids and tied in knots and thrown in all directions, until there was no more resiliency and no more savor to it. Then the film camera chopped short, and the theaters turned dark, and the print presses trickled down from a great Niagara of reading matter to a mere innocuous dripping of pure matter. Oh, the word escape was radical too, I tell you. Was it? It was. Every man, they said, must face reality, must face the here and now. Everything that was not so must go. All the beautiful literary lies and flights of fantasy must be shot in midair. So they lined them up against the library wall one Sunday morning 30 years ago in 1975. They lined them up, St. Nicholas and the Headless Horseman and Snow White and Rumpelstiltskin and Mother Goose. Oh, what a wailing, and shot them down, and burned the paper castles and the fairy frogs and old kings, and the people who lived happily ever after. For of course it was a fact that nobody lived happily ever after, and once upon a time became no more. And they spread the ashes of the phantom rickshaw with the rubble of the great land of Oz, and they filleted the bones of Gilda the Good and Ozma and shattered polychrome in a spectroscope and served Jack Pumpkinhead with meringue at the biologist ball. The beanstalk died in a bramble of red tape. Sleeping Beauty awoke at the kiss of a scientist and expired at the fatal puncture of his syringe. And they made Alice drink something from a bottle which reduced her to a size where she could no more cry curiouser and curiouser. And they gave the looking glass one hammer blow to smash it, and every red king and oyster away.